Good afternoon, everyone. Live from Silicon Valley, California. This is Success Sadhana. My name is JM, and I welcome you all to a program today where we'll discuss lessons from the Golden Monk. The speaker, Vaish, a veteran Bhakti yogi, author, and former monk. We've got 16 members on Zoom and close to 10 members on Facebook. I've got Shweka helping me out in managing social media today. Good afternoon, Vaish. Welcome to another episode of Success Sadhana.
Thank you very much, Jay. I'm really happy to be back here. Great to see all of you, or to see your names anyway. Hey, Linda. Hey, Anand. Shweka, thank you very much for helping out. Angie, welcome. Sharat, Sharnagati, Manish, Jesse, Mayank, Nicole, Sage, Angie, hi. Anna, great to have you again.
Hello.
Vanessa, fantastic. Hi. Shiverman, welcome, everybody. Well, I learned early on when I lived in a ashram, when I was in my teens, to derive knowledge from a reliable source. So in the tradition of yoga and the other spiritual practices, there's a reliable source of knowledge called the Veda. The Veda was originally one. Veda just really means knowledge, but it was given shape by a very famous person named Vyas. Actually, Vyas means the divider, or somebody like an editor. So he divided the one Veda into different compartments. And after that knowledge got expanded upon by those who were practicing it. There are various practices mentioned in the Vedas. And when somebody takes it up and applies it, it moves to a different category. It's not just theoretical knowledge, but it's called realized knowledge. Sometimes we call wisdom. And so in Sanskrit, there's two words, gyan and vigyan. Gyan means something you learn theoretically or academically. And the vigyan means you try it out for yourself and then you realize it. There's a fruit in that. Actually, that's our prerogative as humans, especially because we're conscious beings, but we have a human body and we have the opportunity to direct our attention, our energies into spiritual practices. And obviously there has to be some result, otherwise we won't continue doing it, because there's an expectation that when we put energy into something, something will come back. So millions and millions of people have followed the various teachings of the Vedas and have come out with very consistent kinds of realizations or parallel types of realizations that are very powerful. And many of those are compiled in another group of literatures, which are called smriti, or that which was derived from the practice, or vigyan, realized knowledge. And a lot of those books are very much available. They're through the tradition that I joined and have practiced since I was in my teens. Some of the main books are in Sanskrit, but they've been translated many times into English. And there are commentaries that come with them from some of the ancient teachers that go back thousands of years. And that's the tradition that one follows what the previous teachers have said. And then, of course, there's expansion of realization that gets included as the teachings get passed down and others take it up. So oftentimes when I'm referring to various points, not often, but I try to consistently make sure that it's connected to that body of knowledge coming from the Veda and the Smriti, and also from the great teachers. It's just like in science. When you join a science class, you don't do all the research yourself. You accept what the studies have produced over years with the great thinkers in science. There are giants on whose shoulders we stand, as the saying goes, to see further and so forth. And it's the same in the yoga tradition. Yoga means ultimately to connect. We're always connected, but through consciousness, we become disconnected. I was just realizing the other day that I have this light bulb on my desk, but I haven't noticed it. I need to replace that light bulb, but I hadn't noticed it recently, even though it was right in front of me, until I brought my awareness to it. And the whole world can be like that. We can ignore a whole world. We can ignore individuals. And the idea in the teachings of yoga is that ignorance is also ignorance. Also, it's a way of turning my attention away. And so primarily I've turned away from my original source, and I've forgotten, therefore, who I am. I'm disconnected. So this disconnectedness is full of anxiety, fear, and there are repercussions in that. So the idea of yoga is to be reconnected consciously with our original divine source. And so the word yoga comes from the word yuj, which means to connect. And it's cognate with the modern word yoke. A yoke holds two oxen together when they plow fields and so forth. So one of those great teachers is known as the Golden Monk. He lived in India over 500 years ago and went to many places by himself. Sometimes he had one assistant with him. The roads in India are not so great right now in some places, so they've gotten better in the last 20 years. I've been going there since 1974, but 500 years ago, they were mostly by foot and simple trails. So this golden monk was named Chaitanya, and he went all over India and to various places, towns, and introduced the essence of these teachings of the Vedas in such a way that people who were engaged in agriculture and living in small villages could take it up. And then there were bustling, more city-like environments. And he also taught people there. And he also met some of the greatest scholars of India. For instance, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he's mentioned, you can look him up online, but he was known as one of India's greatest scholars over 500 years ago. And this monk, the Golden Monk, he's called, he met this great scholar. At the time, the Golden Monk was 24 years old, and the scholar was in his middle age. But actually, after talking to the monk for about 10 days, Sarvabhauma became really taken with him and became his follower and began to pass on his teachings as well to his thousands and thousands of students around India. And many others, politicians who met him or saw him also were taken in. Like there were one that was a prime minister in Orissa and who gave up his post actually to really take up the teachings of the Golden Monk. So he was very attractive in stature. He was extremely tall, and it is said that he had a golden hue. That's why he's called the Golden Monk. And a monk means that he had renounced the world. He lived very simply, slept on the ground, walked barefoot everywhere, only possession, he had a little water pot that he would carry around. A lot of monks carry that. And no specific home to stay in, but always take shelter under a tree, but rich with knowledge that he would pass on to others about how to use the practices of the ancient Vedas, but he simplified them in such a way that anybody could take advantage. And so those teachings of the Golden Monk actually have been passed down through many teachers over generations, over 500 years. And I refer to some of those, and I'll go a little bit into the teachings of the Golden Monk today and some of the tenets that he put forward. And he was very poetical in some of his teachings. He talked about how our hearts really are like a garden, and it's how we cultivate our hearts, what we grow there. It's our responsibility as a gardener to grow the sow the types of seeds that will lead to our ultimate benefit. So we talked a little bit about that. So I'll go into that today. But before we go into some of the philosophical points, how is everybody? You don't have to say anything, but you can give me a thumbs up or something.
Doing good.
Please.
By doing good.
All right, Anna, way to go. Thanks, Jesse. I like that one. Everyone okay? Getting along all right into the new year? I've found everywhere people are, Naveen, thank you. Soumya, thank you. Maricela, thank you. People are feeling excited to have a restart to their lives in the new year, starting over, reinforce or make new goals. So one of the ways that we can build a foundation to our spiritual practice is by a little introspection empowered with mantra. So this was one of the teachings of the Golden Monk. He taught that when we meditate alone, that we can come into a kind of recognition that we're a conscious being within a body. We can become aware of many things. The nature of consciousness, at least we can observe it in ourselves. But then he introduced this principle that's prominent in these ancient teachings called the Vedas, that sound vibration is extremely powerful. In fact, one of the statements in one of the oldest texts in the world is anavriti shabdat. And it means that by sound vibration, we can become uncovered and be aware of our higher self and be aware of our connection to our original divine source by sound vibration. So one of his prominent teachings was about taking advantage of spiritual sound, and it comes in nice little neat packages called mantras. So mantra is a sound package. And through this little package that you can take with you wherever you go, you can open the package, take out the contents, and there's a noticeable, you will notice right away that the sound vibration is transformative. In fact, that's what a mantra does. It transforms us. Just the way if you put an iron rod into fire, then eventually the iron turns to fire as well. So our consciousness or our bodies, our minds, they get transformed by the mantra and we become uncovered. So we'll try a little bit to start with. So if you would, and you'd like to try this, just sit up a little straighter than you were a moment ago, because it brings your mind to attention. And then close your eyes and bring your awareness to your breath. And as you're breathing, See if you can get into an even cadence by mentally saying out and counting 2 or 3 counts out, and mentally say in and count 2 or 3 counts in, as is natural for you to breathe, as you feel is natural. And relax, but keep an alert mind. And one of the teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a part of the Veda, Krishna says that even though there are many changes and disturbances in the world, our ability to stay equipoised, even with all the changes going on, is one of the first signs of coming to spiritual consciousness. Because from the vantage point of a self-realized person, only the external environment is changing, and I'm the witness, I'm watching it. So if we get used to noticing that I'm not the body, for instance, notice your breath as you're taking your inhales and exhales, that you're watching the air come in and out, and all the other functions of the body are going on. You're animating the body, but the body has its own algorithms and its own impetus. It's moving by the force of nature. And we're separate and we're watching it. So as you're breathing and bringing your awareness back to your breath, then we can try this mantra. And the first mantra is 2 syllables, Rama. So I'll say the mantra 5 times. And you can repeat it behind muted mics and just feel the vibration of the mantra. And listen to the sound vibration. Rama, 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 Rama. And now in your mind's eye, just see the syllables, R-A-M-A, and the word Rama. And go on breathing naturally, but bring your conscious awareness to the mantra Rama in your mind. And take a couple of breaths while you keep your mind fixed on the 2 syllables, Rama. And now bring your awareness back to your breath. And you can rub your palms together to generate some external sensation. Open your eyes and come back into the room. And now we'll talk about the Golden Monk and some of his basic teachings that are applicable even today in spiritual practice. So the Golden Monk is named Chaitanya. And he had some very close disciples. One of them was named Rupa. Rupa was a highly placed government official who was very wealthy. But when he met the golden monk who was passing through, he gave up his profession and became a full-time student and then a great teacher. Actually, he was a highly educated person who knew many languages, who was expert in all fields of learning, and wrote subsequently many, many books after receiving teachings from the golden monk. So one of the first things that the golden monk talked about was how we're wanderers. Means actually, when we come into this life, we're not really sure where we came from. And nor do we know where we're going when we leave this particular body. There are many ideas people might have about what happens when you leave. According to the golden monk, actually, we're spiritual beings, but we inhabit various material forms until we reach spiritual consciousness. And then we're not obligated to take on another material body. In the meantime, as he taught to Rupa, he gave this a verse. It was in Bengali where he said, Brahmanda Brahmate Kun Bhagyavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasadi Bhai Bhakti Lata Bij. It's a beautiful language, Bengali. And in this verse, one of his first teachings to Rupa, he said that as souls, as spiritual beings, we're wandering through various universes. And we show up in one body after another. We call the process birth and death. There's another word for it that we'll see in a second. It's called Samsara. We flow from one place to the next. But in essence, we are wanderers. And so he talked about the process of Samsara, which means flowing from one material position to the next because of the force of our material consciousness. And as Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, whenever we leave a present body, a body that we're in, we're carried by our consciousness and we're accommodated by the material nature for another body in which to inhabit based on the aggregate of the desires that we have. And there's a force in that through which material nature is not punishing us, but is actually accommodating us and giving us what we desire. So he described this as samsara, moving from one material position to the next. And it's an endless process. So if you look at the next slide, he described how it is that he said, he gave this phrase, habudubu. In Bengali, habudubu means, everyone try it. Say habudubu. I can't tell if you're doing it or not because I can't see everybody. So if you say it 3 times,
Habudubu.
You know what an onomatopoeia is? And very good, by the way, everybody. Good habudubus. Habudubu is an onomatopoeic phrase. It's the sound of bubbles coming up. So like if you're kind of drowning, I don't know if there is such a thing as kind of drowning. If you're drowning and there's bubbles coming up, you're trying to get to the surface, you blah, 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 blah. That's the word habudubu, 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 bubble, 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 bubbles coming up. So he described in his teachings how actually, I think I'm enjoying in the world, but actually it's habudubu. There's bubbles coming up. I'm actually drowning in this ocean of samsara. I'm being pushed around by material nature. But then he said in a very optimistic way, or in a way that gives us optimism, but we can reach the shore. And that's what spiritual practice is, to rise above the ocean of samsara, of being forced by material nature to take on various material forms. So I have a pop quiz for you. You can come back in the room for a second. Do you all like pop quizzes? Do they intimidate you? Have you had enough quizzes? Okay, here's the quiz. And you can write in the chat if you like, or if you wish, you can speak up. So the question I have for you is, how far do you have to be above the surface of the water to not drown? How far do you have to be above the surface of the water to not drown? Please give your answer. 1 millimeter. We're getting some 1 millimeters there. Thank you. Head above the water. Linda, just far enough to breathe. Yes, very good. Not very far. Technically speaking, haha. And at least head up, nose above the neck, far enough to breathe. 9 inches, Pankaj says. Yes, I think everyone passed. You got very high scores. You have to be above the water by at least, I think the smallest increment we have there was 1 millimeter or something like that. We went all the way up to 9 inches. Even if you're 1 inch above the water and your nose isn't in it, you can breathe. And samsara may be going on. The churning of the ocean may be there, but you're not in it. You're not struggling. You can still breathe. So one of the first steps that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said is get out of the ocean, stop drowning. And he quoted from the Bhagavad Gita. Even 500 years ago, great teachers of yoga would quote from Bhagavad Gita because it's over 5,000 years and it's been a standard book of knowledge for yoga practitioners. So he said that it's very difficult to come out of this ocean unless you develop what's called bhakti, or a kind of sense of dedication, devotion to our original source. And when we do that, and we take up the practices of bhakti, and then the golden monk said, then you can very easily rise above the surface of the water. And then he gave some of the symptoms, what we feel like when we actually get out of the water. So first of all, there's a sense of happiness called ananda. And it's a great relief. Like, let's just say you've got a mortgage or rent you have to pay. And then on top of that, you have to pay property taxes. And let's just say at a minimum, you have about 5 different kinds of insurance that you have to pay for in order just to, cover your major liabilities. And then maybe you have a student loan left over. Am I making anybody squirm? I hope not. Then we could go on listing all the obligations that we pile one on top of another. And then there's the sense that at any moment I could be challenged. Everything that I have, everything I've accumulated could be taken away. It's possible at any moment, actually. A natural disaster can come. Something may malfunction in my body. Even perfectly healthy people drop dead and so forth. I know this is a family show, so I don't want to get too macabre here, but that's the facts. And so there's a way in which when we're relieved of all these obligations, to speak of the obligation of thinking I am this physical body, then there's a sense of extreme relief. And when we see our actual nature is not the body, we're spiritual beings inhabiting a body, then we start to feel ananda, or joy, natural joy. And then the next one is that hankering for things that we don't need is eliminated. Like, one of the ways I try to make myself whole is I try to get more connection with things and think, if I just get one more thing, 5 more things, if I just had this arrangement, I'd be happy. But there's a sense, I don't need any other arrangement. I'm already happy. And so in that sense, in that state, one has no hankering and also no lamentation. And then finally, there's a sense of seeing how other living beings are perfectly situated because they're spiritual beings within material bodies, and everybody's in the same situation. So we feel a sense of unity. So he did the golden monk, that there are these immediate benefits that we get from rising above samsara, rising above the water by at least an inch. So then he continued with his teachings. And especially he talked to his main students. One of them was named Rupa and the other is Sanatan. And he gave this technical perspective about living beings. So if you're a living being, please give me a thumbs up. Any living beings here? Okay, there's only 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm checking, like when you go on a website and they say they want to make sure you're not a robot. So you have to tell which pictures have motorcycles in them. Debbie is a living being. Anna's a living being. Linda's a living being. Magdalena is a living being. Okay, excellent. Thank you, living beings who have joined us today. And Subhadra went to the extra mile and she put a yes up on the screen to make sure we knew she was alive. So there's a difference between matter and spirit. They're categorically different energies. They all come from the same original divine source, but there's a difference between matter and spirit. So spirit is conscious. Consciousness is amazing. And if you observe your own consciousness, you get a taste for what the supreme consciousness is like, because we're little samples of our source. So then there's matter. And matter wouldn't matter unless we were the ones looking at it, because consciousness gives context and meaning to matter. I look at matter and I say, this means this means that, and this one's mine, that one's for somebody else. We manipulate matter through our consciousness, and we get attached to it or not, but it's a lower energy. So we're spiritual beings, but our position as spiritual beings, the golden monk said, we are called marginal. In Sanskrit, it's called tatastha. And an example he gave was the beach. On the beach, sometimes it's wet and sometimes it's dry. It's in between two worlds, the dry world and the wet world. And so, although we're spiritual beings, we have a relationship with matter, or we can also be connected to the higher spiritual energy. And therefore, with our free will, we have the choice of where to place ourselves. And the process of yoga really is reconnecting with the higher energy and seeing the material energy for what it is. So that's one of the first teachings that he gave, to understand that we're marginal, we have choice, we have free will, especially as human beings. Animals are living beings, just like we are, only they have different vehicles. The human vehicle is especially adept at coming to a point of full utilizing one's volition to transfer one's attention to spirit. Okay, I like the picture that I didn't want to leave it because it looks kind of pristine there, doesn't it? JM likes it. He put it up there. Okay, let's see the next one. The next teaching of the golden monk. He said, our source, that from which we emanate, is like the sun. It's not the sun, but it's like the sun. I'm just giving a metaphor, or I'm giving a simile rather. And our source is like the sun, but we are like the rays of the sun. So the sun, as the complete whole, has all its parts, whereas we're a part of the whole. So there is a complete whole of which we're a part, we're the same quality as our source, but we're different in quantity. So this is one of his teachings called the Chinta Bhed Abhed Tattva, which means that we're simultaneously one and different from our source. We have our own individuality, but we're also the same quality. We're purely spiritual beings. Right now, because we're marginal, we're ensconced in matter. And that's where the problem lies. If you've noticed any inconveniences, that's where it originates, by connection to matter and thinking that I'm part of the material world, but actually we're not. So the golden monk went on to teach Rupa, his student, that there's two worlds, material and spiritual. And this is something you'll find in the Veda, in the ancient wisdom literatures. This picture actually illustrates one of the principles, and that is that there's a real tree and there's the reflection of the real tree. So the real tree is the spiritual world, and the reflection is in the material world. It's not false, but it's temporary. And you're not going to get a lot out of that either. I mean, it's beautiful, and it looks, if water's still, it looks just like its source. But let's just say there's fruits on the tree. The fruits that you take from the reflection are not going to satisfy you. You won't be able to make a smoothie out of them. Whereas the real fruits, the fruits that grow on the tree, are substantial because they're real in the sense that they always exist. So we expect things to always exist, like this body. We have an expectation that I'll live forever in the body, at least I do. And we have an expectation, or at least a hope or a wish, that we'll always be young. But the body over time changes, it gets old, it dwindles, and then it's no longer inhabitable. We have to move on to another one. So that kind of change is present in the reflection, because the reflection's always flickering, always moving. Whereas in the source, in the original substantial world, there's no change. So he taught, be aware of the different energies. There's a higher energy and a lower energy. Okay, let's take a few reflections. Actually, I'll do this last slide because I like it so much. Can you see what's going on there? I think that the plug does not fit what he has there. That looks like an Indian plug to me. So I have one of those adapters that has all the plugs of the world on one thing. And in many places, you have to figure out how to plug your units into the wall. And let's just say you don't have the right one, it doesn't fit. So we're not compatible with matter. It doesn't
looks
quite
like a
fit.
manager.
He looks like an amateur, right, Wolf?
No, manager. Looks like a
Oh,
manager.
it looks like the manager's trying to get it to work. Looks to me like he's pretty frustrated too, right? So this is the consistent experience in this world, because I'm not compatible with matter. Whereas with spiritual energy, I'm highly compatible, because that's my nature. Okay, so now we'll come into the Zoom room for some reflections. Anything you heard from the golden monk who walked the earth 500 years ago and walked from village to village? He gave us simple teachings that anybody can understand, and then he gave a practice that anybody can employ, no matter where he or she is, to come to this kind of spiritual consciousness, to feel definitively, yes, I'm at least 1 inch above the water. I can breathe. I'm not being swept away in the ocean. Which parts did you hear so far that stuck in your mind? When I count down from 3, you can reflect. 3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah, the last line which you mentioned that, teaching that we are compatible with the spirit, not with the matter much. So all the frustration which we see, I could correlate that because otherwise there won't be any frustration, right? If we are compatible, then there's no noise, you can plug pretty nicely. So I think it resonates pretty well to me that the world which we live in, it is not our natural place to be in.
Oh, thank you. Nice reflection. In fact, frustration is our friend because it points us to the way that we're incompatible, or to the realization we're incompatible with this world. Doesn't mean we're incompatible everywhere, but frustration is the doorway to enlightenment, because we can understand the dichotomy between ourselves and the clunky material energy. Okay, what else? Whatever's on the board, JM, let me know. And anybody else like to speak up, please tell me what you heard. Anything you heard that stuck in your mind?
If Gita was, if Gita was 5,000 years ago, the Golden Monk 500 years ago, was it the intent to re-educate or provide a dumbed down version of the original teaching? Thank you.
Yeah, it is. So there's a way that over time, any message gets diminished. So when you play telephone, I think that's what it's called. You whisper a message and then it gets passed to the next person. You go around the room and it comes out differently at the end. So their renewal is necessary. And I wouldn't necessarily call it dumbing down, but I know what you mean. It's more like simplifying. And in every, according to the Veda, in every era, there are characteristics of every era, and it names 4 major eras that last for hundreds of thousands of years. And they have characteristics. And according to the characteristics of the era, there are spiritual practices which align best with them, with that particular time and era. So the Golden Monk was teaching something very vital, and that was in the era that we're in now, that started about 5,000 years ago, called Kali. It's called the Kali Yuga. Yuga means an era. And during this particular era, there's a prescribed method for meditation, and it has to do especially with mantra. It's very effective in this particular age. So he brought out that essential teaching, and also, yes, as you're saying, Wolf, represented the thousands of years old teachings, and in a way that was understandable to whomever he was talking to. Because he was very intellectual, actually. As a young boy, he was known as one of the greatest scholars. And but then when he began his monkhood and walked around and taught people, he simplified it and it just gave the essence of it, because people didn't have time for a lot of philosophy nor the inclination for it. They wanted just a practice that worked.
You have one more comment on the chat. Linda just shared a light comment saying, after all the Christmas cookies, I'm ready to move on to another body.
Well done. Yeah, definitely. And that's a kind of the indicative of the way this body is. We'd like to go on eating, but there's a cessation, there's a saturation point in gratifying the senses of the body, but there is no satiation point spiritually. Spiritual enjoyment increases like a beam of light. If you shine a beam of light, theoretically, it expands eternally and unlimitedly. So this is the nature of ananda, or happiness, bliss. It doesn't end. It's not flickering, and it also doesn't have a beginning and an end.
Eric has his hand up. Eric,
oh,
please.
Okay, Eric, yes.
I find that these analogies that he used from nature make it really easy to understand these spiritual teachings, like the heart being a garden, where we can sow different types of seeds, the ocean of samsara that we're flowing all different sorts of bodies. I like the beach one, how we're sometimes wet, sometimes dry, like sometimes spiritual and sometimes material consciousness. How the sun is like the source and we're like rays, the same quality but different quantity. Yeah, it's really helpful to like just understand these deep teachings. So thank you very much.
Well, I think you have photographic memory. I think you remembered all of them. Well, let's go back to a few slides then, because there are a couple more metaphors that the Golden Monk taught also. So getting into gardening, this is really important because gardening is a process, and so is self-realization. So this is one of the first points the Golden Monk made about spiritual practice. He said it's like being a gardener. We have to take care of our garden. And our heart is the seat of consciousness. And what goes in through our ears and our eyes, it ends up in the bay of our heart. So one of the important aspects is that when we come in contact with somebody who has this kind of spiritual impetus, it's like planting a seed in the heart. You know, we hear from him or her, we notice that he or she is engaged differently and has a different quality of life based on spiritual principles. And so, you know, the Golden Monk said that there's a way that that plants a seed in our heart. Like any great endeavor starts with a seed. You get an idea for something, and that desire goes within your heart. So when you have this even tiny little desire in your heart that, yeah, there must be something better, and I want to improve myself on the spiritual level, then that seed, by coming in contact with somebody who has it already, is planted in your heart. And so when you become aware of it, then he says in the next slide that you have to water it. So in Bengali, it's a Shravanadi Jal. So this is an interesting phrase. Shravanadi. So Shravana means to hear spiritual sound, like the mantra, especially. And Adi means other spiritual practices, but it starts with the sound vibration that you let into your life, or that you organize your life around. And then Jal in Bengali means water. So carrying the metaphor ahead, he says that you have to water the seed. So the seed's there, don't let it dry up, but start watering it. And the best way to do it is by chanting the mantra. And there are other things too. That's what Adi means. But Shravanadi Jal, it's a nice sounding phrase, isn't it? The Shravanadi Jal. So water your seed. So when you start your spiritual practice, you can think of it like that. You're a gardener and you're just putting a little water on the seed every day, right? Okay, so then the next one, from the Shravanadi Jal, you have to defend your creeper, because I know this very well from my garden. I have a greenhouse, and then I also have planter beds and other, wider areas where I can plant things. But if I put a delicate little seedling out into the main garden, even in the garden beds, the raised beds, maybe I've bemoaned the fact already on this program that last year I put in a lot of bok choy, but I moved it too soon to the big raised beds. And some little vegans out there in the form of snails had a bok choy feast overnight. And they wiped out 40 bok choy seedlings in one night. There was nothing, it wasn't that there was, they had nibbled at it. They ate everything. There was no evidence that bok choy had been in the ground. So the Golden Monk taught Rupa that when you plant the seed and you water it and it sprouts, you start developing a spiritual life, you have to protect it and be careful that it doesn't get devoured by various kinds of entities who will either trample it or eat it and so forth. So you have to be a little careful and nurturing. I am like that with my plants. I feel like a father or something like that, and I'm very protective of them, except for the bok choy, which I feel really bad about. So there are many details to defending your creeper, but that's the basic principle that he taught, and we can go later into the defense of the creeper. And let's come back to weeding the garden, but I just want to hear some of the reflections came up on the board. So let's hear what they are. And if anybody wants to speak at this point, we're all warmed up. If anybody else wants to say something, then you can do that too.
And
Nirali?
I was gonna say the weeds growing up every day.
Uh-huh.
We take out and then new comes in. So
Yeah, it's a good point, Nirali. So this is one of the teachings that the Golden Monk gave. He said that actually, when you water the creeper, it's a very special kind of seed, the desire for advancing in spiritual life. It's very special. He said, but the weed seeds will take advantage of the water, and they'll also grow up. And as all you gardeners out there know, in their seedling form, it's hard to tell the difference between a weed and the plant you're trying to grow, because
yes,
many plants look the same, right, Nirali?
yes.
So you have to become really expert at it. And, some of the teachings from these books I told you about, from the great teachers, they go into a lot of detail, pages and pages of details of things to watch out for. Like, one of them is becoming a profiteer. Not that you can't work and have a living and things like that, but trying to make a profit out of your spiritual life, a cheating or lying are weeds. And there's also undue criticism for other people, gossip and things like that. Long lists of ways in which you can be inviting weeds to come into the garden. T, good to see you.
Hey, you too. I really liked, all of it, but and again, the presentation I'm working on, I have a slide about matter. So spirit timing, what you share. But I really like that about the reflection of the fruit tree or whatever tree, bearing tree. So many people today with my peoples, but I noticed all over as well, will take teachings and then try to speak them and act like they are what that reflection of. You can't eat the fruit of it, make a smoothie of it, like you said, because they aren't it. They haven't been living it. They don't have the nutrients, what comes behind it, the story of its growth or creation, the backstory and things like that. So I thought that was so interesting. And I like that a lot, to be careful what we're picking from and taking in.
Yeah, nice points about that. There's real, there's substance in the spiritual realm. And a lot of it, as you pointed out, has to do with our own integrity and having some skin in the game, actually having realization before presenting and so forth. That was a nice take on that. Thank you, T.
Yeah, for sure, because, and then the spirit of it, if you are eating or think you're eating that, the false of it, just the reflection, then again, as you talk about matter, physicalness of things, then what spirit are you getting? It could be
right.
It could be spirit.
Yeah.
So that should
and think about
intended, but that would truly reflect now in your life, in your walk.
Good point. Reflections look sometimes exactly like the real thing. They just don't act like it. Yes, JM.
I just want take a minute and make an announcement. If that's okay. We have 5 minutes left.
Please.
So, given it's new year, we wanted to try something new. So we are very happy to announce that we will have our first Festival of Inspiration on January 30th at Mountain View, which will have Vaish leading mantra music and dance, a spiritual talk, and vegetarian lunch. Yeah, we will follow all counties COVID-19 protocols. So mask will be required to maintain safe distance, etc. And basically we'll get together, and it's a different energy when you are together, and there is transcendental spiritual vibrations in the air, and a good talk, and you speak your heart out. So you want to experience that together. So if you are interested, please go to vaisheshikadas.com/inspire, and you will find a form there. So yeah, vaisheshikadas.com/inspire, and if you go there, you can see details about the festival, and there is a short form you can fill up, looking forward to meeting you all in the Festival of Inspiration. Anything more you wanted to add, Vaish?
Well, I'm going to be there. I wouldn't miss it. I can't wait to meet everybody. It's been a while. And yes, I agree with everything you said. The vibration's different when we're together like that. Hey, Gidget.
Hello. So if you're going to be there, I'm going to be there.
Yay. Thanks,
so I hope to
Gidget.
see more of you there. It would be a great time to meet everyone.
I'm deeply touched. I really am. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I pasted the registration link on the chat, Zoom chat. Too.
Thanks, JM. Okay, so a couple more slides to finish the teachings. These are very preliminary. He goes into great detail. In fact, he taught these students of his for many days, in the case of months. So then he continued the metaphor, did the Golden Monk, talking about how you have to weed your garden. So meticulously take time to weed. Weeding can be an arduous process if you let it go. If you do a little at a time and you do it consistently, get in the habit of weeding out bad habits when they start coming in right away, then it's a lot easier. In fact, different kinds of weeds are harder to get out than others. There's a little kind of weed that grows in my garden that if I let it go 1 week too long or even 1 day too long, it has an explosive nature. It has little pods, and as soon as you touch it, it explodes. It goes pop, you can actually hear it, pop. And then thousands of seeds go out in the garden, and the little plant's looking at me going, ha, 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 you got here late. And then, there's those thousands of other seeds that will come up. So weeding is essential for gardeners, and we have to weed our hearts and be very careful about it. So he talked more about that in his various teachings. And let's see, do we have one more slide?
No, that was all.
Okay, that's it. So we heard the preliminary teachings of the Golden Monk, and we heard a little bit about his gardening metaphor. And we're going to continue the series in the next couple of weeks, the teachings of the Golden Monk, and going into his garden metaphors. And we'll go into a little more detail about some of the things he said and how to take up the basic practices that he gave. And so one of the ones that he did was called Samkirtan, which is based on transcendental sound vibration. It's chanting the mantra in a group and call and response. And that's what we're going to do in Mountain View when we get together. It's a beautiful place too, where we meet indoors. And then we're going to have some of that, so you can experience it firsthand instead of just over the Zoom, as we've done little tiny touches of it before.
How long is this event? Is it starts at 10 o'clock? Or?
Yeah, the event starts at 11. We'll have Kirtan, and then we'll have lunch break. Then we'll continue for another couple of hours after that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Are you going to feed us, JM?
Yes.
Okay, just so you know, you don't have to bring your own lunch.
Yeah.
there'll be vegetarian and vegan food there for everybody, and there's easy parking and things like that, so it'll be nice. Anything else, James, about the event?
Yeah, so we'll add more information on the website as well.
Okay, all right. Well, everybody, I was talking to a good friend of mine from India recently, and even he was mentioning to me about the yogis in the Himalayas. And he said that, it's true that when they are coming out of their caves to look for roots and fruits to nourish themselves, and they see one another on the high peaks, they raise their hands in the air and they say this phrase, which is meant to encourage one another in their spiritual practice. It goes, Hari Bol, and it means keep the transcendental vibration going. So before we go, let's try it.
Haribol.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Boom.